we're here today to talk about this game called A Mortician's Tale. And when Joe and Victoria shared this with me, this idea with me, I was like, oh my God, please send me a link so I can download it immediately.
Mhm.
Um, and I was actually having kind of a bad day that day. And I downloaded it and I just sat in the dark and I played it from start to finish. And I felt significantly better. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
it was such a great experience. Um, and also like really highlights a lot of the issues in the funeral industry. And
Mhm.
as someone that's worked, like I managed a funeral home and I've worked in crematoria. And so it was just really nice to see this in such a digestible way. Emily, if you want to introduce yourself, that would be amazing, just so everybody
Yeah,
knows.
yeah.
Yeah, who you
So
are.
I'm a funeral director and a licensed embalmer, though I'm in recovery. I do mostly just natural death care now, not embalming so much anymore, although I can have the license to do it. I'm in Vancouver, BC, so in Western Canada. We've been in the news lately because it's a little wet over here and a lot of disruptions to our regular way of things. So, much like you, I have interacted with games as a way of kind of releasing some of the stuff that we carry around. And like I was saying, Spirit Fair was one of those games for me. It was a basically like a hugely relaxing but also emotionally engaging game. And this one was the same. I saw it. It was just on the store, and I was like, oh, well, it's kind of. I thought, I went into it thinking like, oh, they're gonna have a whole bunch of stereotypes about funeral homes and funeral directors, and it wasn't like that. So it was really nice. Popular media's portrayal of funeral homes and directors and what we do isn't always kind. And so it was nice to see something that was a little bit gentler. And so, yeah, I walked through it. And so uh, I don't know kind of what you're feeling. And Kathy Price, that is my mom, and she said the music was loud, so I turned it down. And that's not the first time I've heard that from her. So I figure we'll just start a new game, and you've played it before, so you and I can kind of even talk through it together. And this little bar at the top is going to stay there because this is the only way I can get it to play the music. And I think the music is nice as long as it's
It
not
is so
overwhelming.
nice. It was one of my favorite
Yeah.
parts.
Yeah, and I've got the person who wrote the music is credited in the description for the event, and so I think that's important. It was a really nice part of it. Um, yeah, so basically one of the things that I liked that was so realistic about the way that the game was designed is just that the the costs seemed realistic to me. The things that the information that they're showing, it wasn't these outlandishly huge costs, and it wasn't unrealistically small either. And I just liked that. And the fact that she actually spends quite a bit of her time checking her emails was also really accurate. I think my job is, I would say maybe 10% family care, maybe 10% family care or body care, and then, yeah, like 80% checking emails and just driving around. But the thing basically, so it's this woman who has started at a new funeral home, and they give her instructions on what she has to do every day. And so she gets these emails. And for those of you who are going to go and play this game later on, it's just really the way that they brought the humor into it, sort of like that insider humor that gets used a lot in the industry, as well as just like the really compassionate explanations of this is how this person came to us. This is what the family wants, and this is what we're going to do. That is the way that it goes. So, a lot of people are familiar with what it looks like once you engage the services of a funeral home, but very few people see what it looks like, or even maybe even think about what it looks like on the back end. So this is what it looks like. You you get an email or you get a call from a family, and then it's you and the deceased. It's you and their person.
Yep.
And it basically it's one of the things that I really felt when I was embalming as an embalming full time, which I only did for as long as I needed to get licensed. You would be spending I worked 10-hour days, and I would spend 10-hour days just me and a person. And it's such a different type of connection that you're making with someone when you're not sitting with their families. I embalmed full time, so it's exactly what it looks like here. I would get instructions from a family and then go, okay, we're just going to bathe this person. She's not being embalmed. She's not, there's no viewing, so don't worry about it. So all you do is bathe them. And in a game like this, it's nice and easy. You always start at the face and then work your way down. But in the real setting, it's extraordinarily intimate. And so even if you are, only bathing someone or only dressing them, you're spending at least, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, sometimes a couple of hours with them. And you can't help but in your mind craft a narrative of this person.
Yeah.
And I found, working in the back end only, and, she's about to come out and pay her respects at the funeral. I never had this opportunity when I was working as an embalmer only. You would do all of that bathing, have that really intimate time, and that was it. And for me, I always felt like if I could go and look at their family in the eyes or shake their hands or say, when I looked after your son, it was me doing it. I'm maybe not what you have in mind when you think of an embalmer. Um, but I did it with a lot of tenderness, and I listened to the Beatles. Like I for some reason, and it might just be my own bias, I always felt when I embalmed full time or when I did preps full time that like my whole heart just wanted to go and tell that person's people like it was me. I was the last
Yeah.
person to touch them,
Yeah.
and I care about what I do, right? Um,
Yeah,
and
we've just got
yeah.
a comment in from Cheryl who said,
Mhm.
"I would have loved that with my daughter. What a difference that would have made."
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's, it was one of the things that when I went back to mainly funeral directing, I made such a point of, with my families, bringing that up in the conversation and saying, the embalmers, they look like me. And, and just by that, I mean, it was when I worked in the prep room, it was a busy place, but it was mostly, women in their 30s. And there's a couple of kind of the old guard, the dudes there, but the amount of heart that people bring to work in those spaces is just incredible. And I think when we talk about death acceptance and we talk about, recognizing the reality of these things, like look no further than the prep room of your local funeral home
Yeah.
to find people who are in it, and a lot of them are introverts. So
Yes.
you don't see them on the outside that often. But when you do, they tell you, like you can just tell they're not, they're not crooks or anything. So I find it comforting when I think about my own loved ones or people that I've known, and I go, okay, now that I know so many funeral directors, I've only maybe met one or two over my time where I went, oh, you really should get a different job. Most of them are doing it because it's a bit of a
Yeah.
calling for them.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I'm just gonna mention, so this one, this email is saying that I did a great job, which for anyone who didn't log in before, it was very complicated. I did a great job. So now this next one is an embalming. So it's kind of interesting if anyone's never looked into what's actually involved in an embalming. And you managed a funeral home, you know all about it. How was that? How did you find that? What was the model in the funeral home you worked at? Was it big one,
Um,
small one?
yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing. It was a very life affirming place. You know, walking by, you would maybe mistake it for more of an art gallery than a funeral home, really.
Mhm,
It was stunning, and I learned so much.
mhm.
Um, and I think this is a perfect example. Actually, this was a part of the game that I was like, this is so useful because when
Yeah.
I first saw someone, the embalmer used eye caps, for example,
Yeah.
and also stitch the mouth. I remember my first instinct was I felt mortified.
Yes.
I felt mortified that I didn't know.
And
Because it
that's
made me
so
think back
yeah.
to yeah, it made me think back to all the funerals I've been to, open coffin, where they were my loved ones and I didn't know that they had had their mouth shut, or I
Mhm.
didn't know that they had eye caps in, and they definitely did at that time.
Yeah,
You know, that's
yeah,
just what you do.
yeah.
And it helps, you know, these things help even though they might seem kind of intense.
Yeah, I
They
think
definitely are, but
and, there's also an aspect of consent to it too, because
yes.
people don't know, and if they don't know and we assume anything, you're opening yourself up to maybe doing something that isn't actually aligned with them. But the problem and the tricky part is for funeral directors is how much information do you load onto someone who's recently bereaved?
Exactly.
And the reason that there's things like mouth closures and eye closures is just because that face of death, the way that people look, it hits something in us, in deep
Oh,
in
yeah.
us that it's scary. It definitely it hits something deep. And when I talk to families and when I bring up that, mouth closure and eye closure, I I just say, because it's a little lighthearted, but I say, when we die, a lot of us look like just like when we fall asleep in an airplane, and you're
That's the
so
perfect way to
relaxed.
describe it.
You're so relaxed, but your mouth falls open, your eyes are a little open. It doesn't look that good, but the reality is it's just because your body is relaxed. And so, it's a way of introducing it, but I totally hear you. It's not an easy thing to bring up. Um, and anything where you're then doing an audit of your past experiences and going, okay,
Mm,
what did I see there? What was that anyway? And it's a
yeah.
hard it's a hard thing to go back to. So this is part of why I'm so excited about things like the Lifting the Lid Festival and anywhere where we're doing a consciousness raising about what happens when people die. Um, yeah, Kat, I actually, as when I was embalming and still, I don't really use eye caps much, like at all. Like I haven't found them to be totally necessary. So I was actually gonna say that when we got to this part. Um, like I would
Yeah.
never glue someone's eyes shut. Like absolutely never would glue someone's eyes shut. But I think some of the older school funeral
Yeah, it's very
directors,
old school.
yeah, I find, like Vaseline does a
Yeah.
pretty good job. It's tacky, and it's a lot gentler to me again.
Yeah.
It's just a theme. And so, yeah, this game is so interesting. And Kat, like, I wish I'd created this, but I did not. There's some really wonderful people who put this together. But the way that it explains, filling in the cheeks with cotton balls,
Yeah.
that's definitely something people do. And here we're gonna suture the jaw. Um, so as you can see, it's a little hardcore. And this is what it looks like when you get a licensed embalmer playing the game, right, guys? Just power through. Another thing I was gonna say is I have never in my life shaved someone's chest for a viewing,
Yeah,
'cause
neither have I.
'cause why
Neither have
the
I.
heck would I do
I've
that?
shaved a lot of faces, but
Yeah,
not a chest.
yeah, and this, the massaging to release rigor, totally, where I work now, I'm a partner with a small local funeral home now, and we really emphasize family-led death care, so family participation in everything we do. Um, when we attend, so I like on this past Sunday, I attended a home and helped them prepare for a home vigil with their mom who had died of natural causes. When I got there, it had been a few hours, so she was a little bit stuck, but it's this human instinct, not you don't want to hurt her, you know. So the family, they were sort of standing around and they knew that they wanted to move her arms because she was sort of sitting like this, and but they didn't want to touch her. And so sometimes all it takes is really having someone who is experienced. It doesn't have to be a funeral director, but a friend or an end of life doula or someone to come in and say, you know, she's sitting like that now, but all you have to do is just flex her arms and that'll release it. And then once rigor's been released, it doesn't come
Back.
back. So it's, as soon as I said, it's like, let's get a little bit of lotion and, you can just sort of lift mom's arms and, put some lotion on her hands and just release that. Then they got right in there and, you know, it's, I don't even have a whole lot to do once a family is feeling really comfortable. And that's exactly what the goal is. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it is beautiful.
hmm Yeah. And then it gave them that time, right? It's just that it's
And
time
that
is the
intimate
thing.
space.
hmm Yeah, time in her home with her family and her people, I was there for, I think, about an hour and a half, and then I left, and then they were on their own because that's kinda how it should be, in a lot of ways. Anyway, this is the embalming part. So for the uninitiated, embalming is just kinda hardcore. Um, so with embalming, it just means replacing the. Okay, I remember doing this earlier, and I had a hard time getting. Okay, you're replacing blood with embalming chemicals and a mixture, and it has dye, and it has all these other things in it that help. Oops, um, that help preserve the body. So what we're doing now is just massaging so that the embalming chemical is well distributed, as a good embalmer should do. Um, what they don't show is kind of like the full drainage and whatnot, and sometimes you need to make a couple incision, and the sound
Mhm.
effects are a bit much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super quiet on my end, so I can't even hear them, but,
Yeah,
yeah.
the squelching and all of those
Oh.
sounds. No, they are, but yeah, I think again, it just kind of the contrast between the nice calming music and
Mhm.
then those kind of really maybe gross sounds. There's a nice contrast, I find.
Oh, Cheryl, you're eating lunch. Oh, no.
Yeah, yeah, realism, exactly. It throws a bit of reality in. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, and this is so, again, sorry you're eating lunch, but this you have to drain. This is the, trocar, and so basically what this is, like, it might seem like a little bit medieval, but what it is they're just trying to remove the components that are going to break the body down more quickly. So there's a whole bunch of bacterial and microbial activity that takes place, and as blood breaks down, the vessels themselves they break down relatively quickly and they settle. And by doing this, you're basically halting the natural decomposition process, which is the whole point of embalming. Because for the most part, you're trying to buy yourself time. So whether that's time before somebody's viewed or for a flight, you're
yeah.
just embalming gives you like months,
Right.
where, refrigeration alone could maybe give you some weeks, which is still a lot more than people realize.
I assume, yeah.
Um,
And
but
I think
yeah.
the flight note is interesting and important because, if you did need to, uh, have deceased transported, they have to be embalmed.
Yes. Yeah.
It's not an option to not do embalming in that circumstance, and
Yeah.
the coffin
Yeah.
needs to be specific, usually involving zinc. Uh, they normally ask for zinc-lined.
Yeah, depending where the flight is going, there's
Yes.
basically it's a jurisdictional thing, and so some countries require, some countries don't. It's pretty much standard, Cheryl. So the reality is, actually, if you're flying, for example, within Canada,
Yeah.
you can fly someone. I could fly someone to Toronto legally without having them embalmed. You just have to be aware that the body will be in an unregulated temperature environment, and so that means that without embalming, the body may break down a lot more quickly, or it won't look exactly the same
Yeah.
as when they departed. And that's just because you're trying to control variables, and embalming just means you can control all those variables.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Definitely with
With
international
international flights, I think there may be a exemption that it might just be a rumor, but for if someone's, for example, being flown to Israel for a traditional burial,
Yeah.
but I'm not 100% sure. This is us removing jewelry, not to steal it, but because the family wants it back. And she needs to be identified. So, okay. Different crematoriums do that a different way. Not every crematorium puts the little identifier disc right in there with them.
Yeah.
Um, for anyone watching who doesn't know, most, or at least this is where I am, most places you can actually go and attend the witness or attend the cremation if you want to as a family. So it's called a witness cremation. And what you just saw there with her pressing the button, the crematoriums, they won't have the family wheeling someone in, but they may invite them forward so that they can press the button that actually starts the process. So if you've never had to plan a funeral before, you may not realize that.
It's an
Or,
option.
yeah, a lot of people don't know. Um, and it might seem, you might go, okay, why would somebody want to do that? But when you factor in that so many people have a lot of fears about not, getting the wrong cremated remains back, or they didn't cremate the right person, attending the beginning of the cremation really can eliminate that for people.
Yeah.
Um,
And,
yeah.
crematoriums have extensive process,
Mhm.
that allows that to not happen.
Yeah, there's huge
I
liabilities,
Oh,
huge
yeah.
if you do
Yeah,
something
yeah.
wrong.
Like,
Yeah.
these little ID cards, they follow that person from start to finish.
Yeah.
And, also, in the Hindu religion, it's pretty much required that you have to
Mhm.
witness. Um, so again, it can be a religious thing or it can just be down to preference.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's good to
exactly.
know.
And Kat, you are right. The keeping the body cool, so like that family that I assisted the other day, they could have kept her where she was. They could have kept her basically as long as they want. That body is the custody of the family. And if the family has basically has the presence of mind and the ability to do paperwork, they can actually submit for the death registration on their own, and they can get in British Columbia what's called a private transfer permit that allows them to transport the body on their own. Um, and so that's really actually in where I live, and I believe across Canada, you are not required to hire a funeral home. It is optional. Um, but a lot of people do because it's a lot. It's a lot to
Yeah.
do. So, your family might decide to do I'm dropping it in there. Your family might decide to do the bathing and do all of that stuff, and then just hire a funeral home to do the death registration and to transport the body to cremation, for example.
Can I
Just
ask a
because
question?
it's like paperwork, basically. Yes, you can. Yeah.
Um, I'm from Canada, and I don't really know the ins and outs. I've only worked in funerals in the UK.
Hmm.
And my question is, do you need a funeral home to, um, in order to access the crematorium's services? Do you have to
Technically,
book through
no. Families can work with crematoria directly.
directly?
However, as you will know, because I'm pretty sure this is just how it is around the world, it's not straightforward.
No.
The
Yeah.
requirements, what expectations need to be met. I think a lot of crematoriums would be daunted by being approached by a family directly,
Yes.
and frankly, just a little worried about it. So they're businesses, right? They're private businesses,
Exactly.
and they just need to make sure that they're doing everything above board. So technically, yes. Practically, probably not, just because
Yeah.
it again, it comes down to sort of what is worth your attention and energy in those moments. And if you've got, a week after someone has died that you're trying to get all of this stuff done, do you want to be spending an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours trying to convince the
Yeah.
crematorium to accept you? Like, it's
Yeah.
just
Exactly.
you can,
Exactly.
but is it worth it? Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I asked because the crematorium that I worked at did not allow it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's just interesting to see where different places have
It's
different.
technically permitted, like, it's legally
Yeah,
would be
legally,
permitted, but in terms of individual policies,
practicality.
yeah. Um,
Kat says it is a lot, and society has stigmatized home funeral care and aging in bodies, natural process at end of life, and post mortem care. It is
yeah.
a lot of big feels to take up that fight. Oh yeah,
Yeah, and that's where if you have a funeral director or a funeral home that you trust, that you can get just like, I only want this from you, or I
yeah,
only want this, like, I do not need your involvement for these other things. If you have that person as a
relationship.
partner, it's incredibly valuable, because then you can trust and leave certain things to them, which is the okay
Yeah.
thing to do.
Yeah,
Um,
it's like outsourcing,
yeah.
right? It's like, again, it is a kind of cost benefit analysis where you're like, because really, really, in grief, you
It's
don't
true.
have that much expendable energy.
Well, it's the effect of cortisol on the brain, right? Like, it's
Yes.
just like you are not firing the way that you normally do, and I'm having to remind, or I don't have to, but I do remind people of that a lot when they come in and they talk to me or they call me back 5 times because they're confused and they go, "I don't know what's going on." And I go, "Well, you're in grief.
Yeah.
You're you're literally, your brain isn't allowing you to process what's going on." So, like, I tell people things, but I might have to tell them 5 times, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, à la carte funeral services. Yeah.
Yes.
And technically, most funeral homes should be doing that, or should be able to do it, but it comes down to their resources too. Not every funeral home can have a director available to run out and assist with home death care at any time of day. It's a 24/7, 365 industry. So, even right now, I am on call, even though I'm doing this. If a call comes in, I may have to take it. So,
Yeah. It's
that's
the
just how
nature
that
of it.
is. Mhm. Um,
Another thing I really, really liked in this game
mhm.
was there's this funerals monthly email that you get.
Yeah, yeah. I actually wanted to
And
say something about that too. Go ahead.
so this one is on green burials, but it kind of changes every time you go back to your inbox. Like one of them was about pronouns, and the
Mhm.
importance of using pronouns correctly, how to queer death, all of these things. So they just threw in all of this like amazing, juicy, really important stuff
Yeah.
into these emails, which I just found so such a nice touch.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the thing. I was so surprised, pleasantly surprised by this game because it was done in such a thoughtful way. That yeah, things like the squelching and the the way that they did the embalming, they actually included all the stuff where I went, "Oh my god," they included the suturing of the mouth. I'm like, "Wow."
Yeah.
Or like this next part with the pacemaker removal. And so
Yeah.
they went and they put in these little things, but they did it in such a accessible way where this could be any type of job, and I just
Yeah,
uh never would have
yeah,
thought that.
same. I wasn't
Um,
expecting it when I, put it on. I don't know what I was expecting, but I loved it.
yeah, yeah, and I think they consulted, I think, with Caitlin Doughty,
Yes,
she's
they
done a
did.
ton of work, so she's like the original normalized funeral industry person.
Mm.
So it's,
I
you
love her
know,
as well, Kat.
yeah, she was one of the people that when I first got into it, I was like, "Oh, is this something that people can just do?" And she just made it very accessible. And I remember listening to her, and so many people would ask her like, "What can I do?" And then at some point, she just said, "Well, just start working at a funeral home." And then that's when I was like, "Oh, I should just go work at a funeral home."
Yeah.
And that's when
I
I did.
remember a
Mhm,
distinct, like, change for me was when I first read, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and
mhm,
Other Stories from the Crematorium. And I think it was maybe my first year of university or around that, and
mhm,
that's kind of where the seed got planted, I think.
mhm.
So yeah, it makes you really think how one person can have such a wide spread, and
Yeah.
then you see something like this going on, and each individual person here then has their own spread.
Mhm. Yeah.
So it's really
These
exciting.
little circles of influence. Um,
Exactly.
so this is just you have to remove pacemakers before someone's cremated. Is another thing that I think sometimes families, if you don't tell them
Yeah.
about it, they might just be kind of surprised or confused. But they are, it's batteries and they can destroy the the crematorium, the retort.
Oh yeah, it will
Um,
explode.
yeah, it will
It
explode.
will
So
literally explode.
and so normally, I would I would suture up, and then usually with these, because 'cause they're just little incisions, I usually just put a Band-Aid over them, because just for my own thinking, but in this one, they just go, "You know what? I'll just send them on." So there's just little things, and I think it's actually just everybody does things a little bit differently.
Different. Yeah.
Mhm. I, for one, would never have a coffee in the prep room. That seems really gross, but
Yeah, the first time
yeah.
I watched an embalming, I made myself and the embalmer a coffee, and I
Mhm.
was so amazed at how she was just going for it with this coffee, and was stood there, my first
Yeah.
time ever seeing something like that, and
I
I just remember being like, "There's no way I can drink this right now." You know, this
well,
person
and they
literally open
also
on the table, and I was like, "The coffee is not happening for me."
yeah, you're definitely not supposed to.
No,
In
yeah, it was
funeral school, we learn about how carcinogenic embalming chemicals are,
yeah,
and
yeah,
so I never would embalm without a respirator on. Like, it was unheard of, and it's actually work safe AC,
yes,
which regulates us, but I'm pretty sure most of the regulators are like, you need to have these on because it's a known carcinogenic,
yeah.
and a lot of people in this industry are being exposed to these extreme things. So yeah, the idea of having a coffee and just drinking it while doing all of this stuff. And there's like
Well,
bloodborne
this is the
pathogens. I'm
thing.
like,
Yeah, yeah.
it's not cool.
There were definitely bloodborne
Mhm.
pathogens, and um, it's interesting because I feel like it talks to the culture. I mean, on a wider scale, I think
Mhm.
you have people that are kind of like old school. Maybe this is a generalization that maybe think, uh, so what?
Yeah.
Or maybe I don't know what the word is, or the way I'm
They're
trying to
just
phrase it.
nonchalant. Like,
Yes,
they were
nonchalant.
so like, I remember talking to some of the old school embalmers, and they'd be like, "Yeah, we used like, they used to just, like, smoke cigarettes while they're
Yeah, yeah.
suturing and stuff, and, like, just, like, it was Wild West back in
Yeah,
that day,
yeah, yeah.
but not anymore, and they, or, like, not wearing gloves, stuff like that, where
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
like,
no, no, no,
you're
gloves
looking
are a
for
must.
vessels, you're doing base my embalming teacher called it post-mortem vascular surgery,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
so
no,
you
that's exactly what it is.
never do that without gloves on. It was mind-boggling, but stubbornness was actually also a
Yes, that
feature of a
yeah,
lot of those people. Really funny, interesting people with a lot of stories to tell, but yeah, by the book, they were not. Yeah. So,
oh, this is a good one.
yeah. Oh, okay, let's see. Funerals monthly. Things to avoid saying at a funeral. Um,
At least.
yeah, yeah. At least they're no longer suffering. This is the thing though, this is part of the beauty of this game is they just stuff these little tidbits in here that
Mhm.
are just you kinda wish anybody would look at this
Right.
before they go. Some funeral homes do have a funeral etiquette page that I think that they include stuff like that, but, I know how you feel. Yeah, you don't. None of us know. We can guess. I think this is the
Yeah, the
biodeg
mushroom suit.
yeah, which you get a lot of questions about the mushroom suit. I can't remember who said it, but someone I was listening to went just it's such a human thing to try and do something better than nature just does it. Um, and I feel like the mushroom suit is one of these examples where it's like nature's pretty good at
At
decomposition.
doing this already.
So the
Yeah,
shroud in a natural sort of shallow burial, it's gonna do the trick, you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
Yeah, so I feel
Um,
like I'm totally scooting over these emails, Kat, but you're absolutely right. Like they're
yeah, they're
very
amazing.
yeah, this is where the richness and a lot of the length of the game comes from too, is
Yes, is
just from
going
reading.
through
Yeah.
and here it's
Yeah.
someone that's died by suicide.
Mhm.
Um, and the funeral home owner is kind of like, "This might be early on in your time here to do this, so if you're not comfortable, someone else
Mhm.
can do it." Um, but yeah. And
Yeah.
also, the
It
family's going
mentions
against his wishes.
Yeah, so it mentions that in the will he wanted cremation, but the family wants a burial. And so again, this is one of those messages that conveys something that's a challenging truth is that we have wishes and we can express those wishes, but unless the people around you and the people who are in charge of your arrangements after you die, unless those people are in agreement and on board, then it's going to be what the call that they make when the time comes. So the wills aren't binding to the funeral home. A lot of people think, or a lot of people end up in this situation, especially in the cities, where I'll meet with families where they may have wanted burial, but the cost of burial is so prohibitive that they make the decision for cremation and they're torn up about it. But those are the realities. And so it's,
Yeah.
again, the value of talking about things ahead of time and making plans ahead of time. Then you can, if someone says they want burial and then you just Google what it costs for a cemetery plot in your local cemetery. And if it's 10 grand, then you can have that conversation right off the bat and go, that's a little bit more than we can afford right now. Or 27 grand. Like that's,
Yes, and that's the
I,
reality, right?
yeah, I served a family once that paid $40,000 for their plot in Burnaby, which is where I live. So yeah, it's not easy. It's all of this stuff is so fraught, and we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to do like a right thing when there isn't really.
Yeah.
You just kind of got to do what feels okay in your gut and what's not going to cause you grief later on. But I'm going to say yes, I'm comfortable with this. So I'm unilaterally making this decision for
Yeah.
everybody. Because yeah, it's important. You know, a lot of people have asked how the pandemic has been for me as a death worker. what my experience has been like. And I would say that, part of it is, people are asking about whether it's this big surge in deaths from COVID. And thankfully, in my area of the world, we have not had that. But what we have had is a huge surge in overdose deaths and fentanyl poisoning deaths and mental health crises and people who are in isolation and deteriorating due to their isolation. And so, if I had to say that this time in COVID, what that's been like for me is just the isolation and not being able to bring people together who really kind of have
Need
this
it.
like primal need to gather. That's
Yeah.
been the hardest part. And also just all these folks who feel that they're the only ones experiencing this specific type of suffering when there's this huge community of people who are suffering on their own right now, or who have over the last 2 years. And, if someone lost someone in the fall of 2020, and now it's almost 2022, and they're still kind of sitting with it, and they haven't had an opportunity to grieve and gather,
Mhm.
that's the complexity of the time that we're in right now.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was a bit of a tangent, but yeah.
No, no, but it's very, 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 very important to talk about.
Yeah, and in dealing with queer death. Yeah, this is the big thing. I would say if you're someone who has concerns about your close next of kin making the right decisions for you, your best sort of defense is to have a will written and to appoint somebody
Yeah.
who knows you
Yeah,
and
who you trust.
who can represent you in the way that you wish to be represented. And that, unfortunately, or just, I'm 30, I don't have a will written. I should, I work in this industry, you would think, but I've always thought, oh, I don't have a house or I don't have kids, so why do I need a will? But if I'm gratefully I'm in the position that the people that are, the legal next of kin, I know that those people are are on the same page as me. If I were in a
Yeah.
situation where I thought that they weren't, then um, I would recommend anybody in that situation, if you know that your mother would be the one who's making decisions because she's the next one in order of priority, then and if you know that your mother would not make the decisions you want, then write a will.
I believe so,
Yes,
Kat.
being married does usurp transphobic parents. Yes. The way every jurisdiction has their own. In British Columbia, it's your spouse is always the first. Um, and it would be a will, an
I
advanced care
will.
plan, a power of attorney ends at time of death. Basically, all things healthcare related end at time of death, and it becomes the executor who has the ultimate right.
Yeah.
And so that's another thing that people don't realize. I'll get calls from people and they'll say, "Well, I'm the POA. You know, we need to do this." And I go, "Well, are you the executor?" And they go, "No, there's no will." And I go, "Well, what's the
Yeah.
relationship?" And then you're required to go down this list of people and say, "Unfortunately, we need to track down these other people who are
So
next
and
in
so,
line."
yeah.
Yeah, and it can be really painful.
Yeah. The
Um,
will deals with the more the legal the gut the bleh. Sorry, long day. The
yeah, no, I
legality
bet.
um around this stuff,
Yeah.
it's like a very, 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 very important document.
Yeah, and, again, like the will, you can write, "I wanna be cremated" in my will, and that doesn't guarantee that the people will have to, but if you write, "This person is the decision maker," that is binding, and, people can contest and whatnot, but it's a legal process that they have to go
Yes.
to try and retrieve that right. So I really Yeah, I think that that's just you gotta put as many things as you can in your corner. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, and I'd say especially people who have anxiety or fears around it. Um,
Yeah, it's a nice reassurance
mhm,
that you can give yourself, really,
yeah,
by appointing those people in those sections. Yeah,
yeah.
get it in writing.
And
Um,
actually, I'd noticed, and I don't know if I was just spacing out before or not, but I did notice when I was doing a death registration this week that they used to just have male, female, and blank, and now they've got an X option too for death registrations, which I think is actually pretty relatively recent. So things are changing very slowly,
progress, yeah.
very slowly, but I was
Progress,
heartened
not
to see that.
perfection.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, hopefully progress that inches along. Um, yeah, so let's read a couple of these. Right, so their little funeral home gets acquired
Yeah, it's
by
really
a
sad.
corporation. It's all very real. Um, and this actually was something that happened a lot in the 80s and 90s, actually. There was, kind of an interesting sidebar, but there was a lot of people who had these sort of like intergenerational family funeral homes, and it's not an easy job, and especially when you're living in the funeral home, the life work life balance is sort of like a myth.
Yes.
And I think what happened was there was a lot of the next generation that just said, no way, like I'm not taking over this business. And so these people were left with decisions. I think a lot of funeral homes ended up bought up during that generational change.
I think
Um,
that's happening now in the UK.
yeah, yeah. And it's kind of the industry doing it to themselves by not establishing boundaries
Yeah,
and not
boundaries is a really huge, huge one.
yeah, and we all, you can't have none of us are perfect. You can't have these perfect boundaries, and there will be some times where you go way above and beyond,
Yeah.
and you're just sort of burning yourself out completely, but some families just need that much from you, and as long as you're not doing
Yes,
it every single time, it's just part of the territory. Um,
absolutely.
yeah, so they're really upset about the corporation purchasing, and I don't blame them. Who charges this much? So they've had a price change because they were purchased, which, yeah, I don't know what it's like where you are, but here, funeral homes are required to give their price list to you if you ask for it.
Yes.
So, I think that that's a relatively standard thing, but
I think oh, yeah, they have to give the but they just, changed it so that I believe it now has to be on the website
hmm,
an itemized one. So not just like I don't think you can just say I could be completely
packages.
wrong on this,
Mhm,
but I think you can have packages, but I think you do need to have somewhere an itemized breakdown for what you were saying before, the à la carte type,
mhm.
right? Say somebody just wants you to um, look after the deceased until the funeral.
Yeah.
You have to have the pricing for that.
Yeah, and we aren't there yet. Like our funeral home, we have our prices online because honestly, it just makes life easier for us too.
Yes. Yeah.
And oh, piss. Um, but I also just find as a trust building thing, just having families be able to go and explore and see what the prices are themselves. Um, by the requirements where I live are that you have to have them available. So people have to go
Ask.
into the front lobby and pick up the physical piece of paper, and so it's not easy, and I know there's some of the big guys don't really make it very easy for people, but, um, yeah, prices, all that stuff, like, it's your right
To
to
know.
know, so this is one of those delegation tasks. I would say you call a friend or a trusted like, someone who's got a degree of separation, my girlfriend Megan told me about something that I know that she read somewhere else and I have no idea, but it's like basically the circle. And so you've got the person at the middle of the circle who's right close up to what has happened, and they dump out to the secondary circle, and then those people dump out to that circle. So you find the people that you trust in the surrounding circles, and just so that we're not focusing energy in on the people who are struggling the most.
I
Um,
love that.
yeah, and so I think that checking prices and calling different funeral homes, that's like a second or third ring job.
Yeah. Yes,
Um,
yes, yes. It's
yeah,
often a friend of the family or somebody, yeah,
yeah. And I
somebody
think that
that's
I think we skirted over this earlier, but just in case, and I know that there's probably some people who've jumped in who are just jumping in at this point, but when someone's cremated, there are bones. Cremation breaks things down, but it leaves sort of like the bigger pieces. And so those bones are processed down into what we call cremated remains. So this process is using the
in the
cremulator. In the
cremulator.
cremulator, the most ridiculous
Isn't
product
that the
name.
craziest
That
name?
was
When I found
I
out, when I started
know.
working at the crematorium and the guy said to me, "Oh yeah, I'll show you the cremulator." I was like, "Is that
Yeah,
an actual joke that it's
I
called that?"
know. It's kind of funny to me that there's not more, like, comedians working in funeral service
I
because the whole
know.
thing is just so ridiculous
I
sometimes.
know.
You're just yeah, there's a lot there's a lot of humor on the fringes of life.
Yeah. Yeah, you have
Um,
to.
yeah, and it's never at the expense of anybody. There's a lot of very, like, these unspoken
Self-deprecating
rules
humor.
about, you know,
What is and
where the
isn't
boundaries
appropriate.
are, but sometimes you just have to laugh because it's just so heavy.
Ridiculous, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and
Also,
yeah.
I didn't know until I didn't I thought from just, and like this is the thing, when you don't know, when you're not taught, your mind like jumps to its own conclusions. So I imagined that in when you are cremated, everything gets reduced to ash and like this
Mhm.
like what you receive basically, and that
Yeah,
like people were scooping it out, and like that's kind of the image that I had in my mind. And then learning about the cremulator and that basically that's what makes the ash that you receive,
yeah.
again, was another big moment for me, kind of the same as the eye caps, where I was just like, oh my gosh, like
I know, and there's a
who
lot of
knew?
people. I went to a community event once, and it was a mortality event, so it was, made sense. But one of the women that was there found out that I was a funeral director, and she sort of took me aside, and she's Japanese. She was a new Canadian. She'd only been here for 10 years, but she said that she had found out about the bone grinding thing. And in Japan, they've got this beautiful ceremony around actually removing the full bones after cremation and placing them in a box, and they don't process the bones down into cremated remains. And so she had this like whole ball of anxiety about the idea of her bones being ground up.
Yeah,
And I said, just like ask,
yeah,
talk to your family, talk to like the crematorium doesn't really know any different. If you said don't process her remains, this is not how it's done in her tradition, they just wouldn't do it
yeah.
and they would
Yeah.
release them. It's totally up to the family to make that call. So I told her that, and it was just like this kind of load off. But the next big job for her would be to start asking those questions ahead of time to make sure that it happens.
I
Um,
agree, Kat.
but
Me
it was a
too.
really interesting, yeah. And it's kind of like the mouth closures or eye closures. It's
Yes,
just something that kind of happens. Um, like,
that's
and
kind of
I
intense.
don't ask families whether or not they want cremated remains processed down because it's just such a standard in our North America or sort of the Western way.
Yeah, the West. Yeah,
Um, yeah. So, and this
this
is
email was a big one.
contracts. Yeah, they were disposing of unclaimed remains. It's an important
So
revenue stream.
homeless, or people that didn't have a next of kin.
Yeah,
So basically, the council or whatever,
yeah,
having all these bodies and basically these new funeral owners, the owners, the corporate, they're
mhm,
like, yes, cha-ching, um,
yeah.
which is the
Which they
sad
must have a
reality.
different system than we do because in Canada the government sets the rates and it's not lucrative. So
Mm,
you kind of taking on these cases is something that every funeral home is responsible to do, but
to split
it's
them.
yeah, they're just sort of shared and no one yeah, it's not like there's any one funeral home that's got that contract
The
and is
stake
making the
in the
big bucks
contract.
off of it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, And again, they set the rates, so it's below most of what most funeral home rates are. He has no
Hi, Janelle.
valuables. Pardon? Oh,
Oh no, Janelle has
oh.
to come. Hi.
Hi, Janelle. Thanks. Yeah, we get calls where I live. The public guardian and trustee kind of is the first one to bat, and then if they locate assets in an estate, then they will make the arrangements and pay for it out of the estate. And if there is no money, then they will release to the Ministry of Social Development, and the ministry will then pay for the services based on their rates. But that process sometimes can take
A long time.
a long time. So for the public guardian to actually sort of track down any living next of kin to look after things can sometimes take weeks. And so that time that that person is waiting, they're just at the facility. They're at the morgue, either at the funeral home, usually the funeral home, sometimes the hospital, just waiting. And it's really
God.
it's harsh, I feel like sometimes, but they have to do their due diligence, and there's I don't know a way around it. Yeah, just in case people find family, they find family, but it's heartening to me that we don't have, where I live, we don't have the government with this one
Yeah.
contract. And so this funeral, there's no people because no one knew who he was.
And I love how she
Gone to a lot of
bows.
these. Yeah, we've got, I think most funeral directors, myself included, have kind of like our roster of poems and things that we say when we do these burials for people who didn't have next of kin, at least legal next of kin. Yeah, everybody at some point was connected to someone, so it's a really interesting experience. Right. Pediatric and maternity. Oh, home funeral.
Oh yeah, they don't let him do it.
Yeah, which is very unethical. Upsell customers. Rah, rah. I worked for a corporate funeral home before, and like they do things in a very traditional way, but they would never explicitly tell someone not to do what they wanted to do. Like there's still a sort of foundational level of ethics that exists. And I can't speak for everyone, but at least where I was, still felt okay about it. But yeah, a lot of the time they just do things within the parameters that they're comfortable with. So if someone asked for a home funeral, they would go, I just don't know how to do it. And that's as good as telling somebody no if they really need your guidance, and you just say, I don't know how, and you don't direct them to someone who can help them, then yeah, it's as good as saying no. So I think that ethically, as any professional in any field, if there's something that you don't know about, I feel like you are required to find someone who does before you advise someone, no matter what you do, and that's included here. But yeah, we didn't get that many requests for home funerals when I worked at the corporate funeral home. I think that the people who knew about it were probably kind of already going to this sort of more indie funeral homes where I work now. So there's that. And I was talking about Koru Kat. I saw you say that before. So I've been working with Nayo Davis, who talked earlier. She was in the Eco Desk one. She and I work together at Koru, and it's awesome. Okay, so I think, again, if any new people came in, this is us suturing the mouth shut. And it's not exactly like that when you do it. It's, oh, you're friends with Wendy, huh? When you suture the mouth, it's sort of, you're suturing just under the lips, so you're kind of going up this way, kind of through the nose, and then under the jaw. pulling kind
Yeah.
of the mandibles together, the upper and lower. And it's grim. Like I would say of
Yes.
all I everybody's kind of got their things, I think whether you're like a nurse or a death care person or whoever, but I mouths can't not my thing. Not a big
I
fan of
agree.
cleaning mouths. We'll do it and we'll do it with dignity,
Of
but
course.
not a fan.
It's hard. It's hard.
I
Yeah, and that's a
yeah,
good point that
yeah,
everybody has their thing, right?
yeah. And it's,
And again,
yeah.
the idea of cotton being used, like I
Mhm.
remember with the first deceased, that was kind of there's a lot of liquid,
Yeah.
and it was yeah coming up into the mouth. And when I saw again the person that I was working with grab this big wad of cotton, I was like,
Mhm.
"What are you doing with that?"
Yeah.
You know,
Where's that going?
and then
Yeah.
you know, but again,
Yeah.
practical, so
Yeah.
practical.
Yeah.
Um,
I
Thanks,
know.
Sky.
Yeah. That's
Bye,
Sky.
Cheryl.
Thanks, Sky. Um, yeah, it was fascinating. The first like when I first started in funeral school, I watched like a video of an embalming. We had access to this old grainy, like from like
Wow.
1970 video because I wasn't until you are working at a funeral home as an apprentice, you are not allowed to go and just see an embalming because of all the privacy issues with that. And I'm glad it's that way. So like
Yes.
regular people just can't go and watch
Watch.
embalmings in where I live. Um, but I remember watching it and just being like, "Oh my god, there's no way." And
Yeah.
like like I had worked in e-commerce before that, so there was like I'm not a nurse, I'm not a care aide. I don't have babies. I'm like this visceral kind of in the
Yeah, very
weeds
visceral.
life earthy stuff was very unfamiliar to me, but it was, I think, kind of like how I started this. Once you're there and you're with the body, it's just so overwhelmingly vulnerable, the position that they are in. And this is kind of philosophical for anybody, but the way that I work and the way that I am, those are people. So that I'm like, they're so vulnerable. I cannot afford to be squeamish. I can't
Yes.
afford to be, you know, grossed out or any of that. Like that's because it's their dignity and it's my job. It's my role to be
Absolutely.
present and to
Yeah, it's like your
yeah.
ego just has to get pushed completely. It doesn't exist in that room.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
can't.
yeah. And that's because that's just a you thing. Like if I'm there and I'm like, oh, this is like, this smells bad or this looks crazy or I'm like, I can't even wrap my head around it. I'm making it about myself and it's just not. The whole
Yeah.
reason that I'm there is to look after someone that is most often beloved to somebody who isn't there. And it's always the operating principle is to treat them as if they're my person. And how would I want my person to be treated and talked to? Because I'm absolutely talking to them. And that's just treating them with tenderness. So, yeah, when I was watching it on a video, yeah, maybe a little bit horrified, but like the second that I was in
In the
the
space.
room with them, it was just,
Completely different
yeah,
story.
something else just takes over, right? Um, um, okay, I didn't read the last emails. I just scrolled through them. This never happens to me at work, by the way, but something has come up quickly. Congratulations.
Right.
Oh, I think I bought a new business.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
We're
have my
opening
own
her
funeral
own.
home
She
now.
said F the man. She said F
Yeah,
the man, and she's opening her own eco-friendly funeral home, which is
that's
awesome.
that is very similar to what my life actually was like. Yay!
Yeah, yay.
Yeah. And so yeah.
Look at her little
Look at it.
office.
Now I'm wearing a little dress. It looks so
Like so
cute.
cute.
And it's a green burial.
Yeah. It's so
Yeah,
exciting.
it is. And this, it's just so natural once you get down to it. Look at this little shroud. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
That snuck up on me. I was too involved in.
We were having such a good conversation.
Yeah, I got too chatty. Classic.
And then
So
that's how it ends.
that's the end. Look at that timing. And we even jabbed a bit. I think we're only 7 minutes
Yeah, we nailed
past.
that.
Nailed it. Oh, and the person who did the music will be in here. And I know the music was a little bit too loud for some
No, but
folks at the
it is
beginning, but
beautiful.
it's so calm. It's just like,
Yeah.
and so anybody, if you've got Steam or if you've got the ability, this game really is worth playing and worth actually reading through all of the emails and
Emails,
reading
yeah.
through.
Talking to all the people grieving at each funeral, like you can
Mhm.
go up to them
Yeah,
and
you
tell
can
them.
talk to them and they'll say different things that, you may or may not have thought of. They kind of just talk through what you actually hear people say at funerals and you get to kind of witness these conversations. It's a really like heartfelt, cool game. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah. Wow, I can't believe how perfectly the timing worked
Yeah,
out.
that
I was
timing
really
is
glad that we'd be
amazing.
here for a bit. But
Um,
yeah,
yeah, wow.
I
Well,
don't know.
thank you so much. Does anybody
Mhm.
have any questions? We have maybe a couple minutes
Yeah.
to see if anyone has anything that they are burning with. Maybe, maybe not. What did Kat say? Right, the stories are
Running
enough.
at death.
Huzzah! Yeah, exactly. Well, it's sacred time. It just feels so tender. You folks are brave. I don't know if I could do. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's not. That's thing. It's not for everyone, right?
Yeah, and I think we're always like I am always surprised at what any of us are capable of doing. Not
Capable.
like I'm surprised at myself, but it's always something where in my mind, like, if I had really thought about some of the stuff that I was gonna end up doing, I could have really psyched myself out of ever even going into this career. But then once you are in the moment and you're doing things, it's just so much bigger than you. So
Yes,
it's
I think that's exactly it.
yeah, as a job, it's just so enormously rewarding that it it's very cool. I just feel very lucky to do it. But yeah. Thanks, Kat. Thanks for being so engaging, Kat. This has been
Yeah,
really
yeah,
nice.
seriously. Love it.
And everybody else too, and our
Yeah.
silent listeners out there.
Yeah,
And my mom,
absolutely.
who if she's still on here, like
Yeah, hey,
I'm hanging
mom.
on. There she is. Hi. Yeah, so if anybody I'm an open book. So I know there's a lot of sessions and I am really enjoying this platform and everything, so I'm sure that I'll see other people in other sessions. But so
I'll
this
finish
is
with that.
this website is for the funeral home I'm a partner with at Koru Cremation in Vancouver. And even if you aren't in Vancouver, there's a lot of really great resources on there. Nayo, who's the founder, she's been building up that site for years and years, and she's done a great job. And I'm at Death Care BC on my social media.
Perfect.
So yeah, that's where I am, and you can find me there. And I've enjoyed this. It was nice chatting with you. This was
Yeah,
great.
thank you so much. I'm always like just so in awe, kind of echoing what Kat was saying, like I just how much like love is in this work. And it's
Totally.
so nice to meet someone that comes at it with that. And most do, right? And I think that's
Hmm.
what you kind of touched on, that the perception of the funeral industry versus the reality, right?
Yeah.
The reality is it's very tender, it's very respectful,
Hmm.
all of the above.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm so glad that we got to do that.
Yeah. Me
To
too.
be
I'm
honest,
glad
I
it worked.
loved
Holy Dinah.
playing. I loved playing it. So it was so fun
Yeah.
to watch it. It was so fun to talk through it.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Awesome.
we'll definitely stay in touch. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, just leave them, and or send Emily a message on
Yeah,
her.
I think I'm gonna jump over. I think the Spirit
The
Fair
Spirit
starts
Fair.
until 3:30, so I'm gonna go jump on for the last 20 minutes and
Yeah,
fangirl a little bit over their stuff.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Me too.
another
Me too.
beautiful game. So
All
thank you
right.
so much. Thank you, thank you. I really enjoyed this.
Have a good day.